Hello, everyone. Hopefully this is working. We are still just figuring out the technology over here. I can see that there's 10 attendees, and I think more people will be joining here shortly. And we did receive some news that some of the links weren't working, so we are trying to make sure we send out an updated email. But I see some people are here. So just bear with us for a couple minutes before we get started. Just a couple more minutes. Hopefully you can hear us okay. Okay, I see that there's people are trickling in. I believe that this is working. If it's not, please let me know. This is our first time doing this live event on Teams. And of course, you always think you have the technology worked out, and sometimes it doesn't. 2 years into a pandemic, and we're still living with technology and figuring it all out. So thanks everyone who has joined. I see more and more people trickling in according to the teams here. So thank you so much. We're going to just get started with a land acknowledgement. So in the spirit of reconciliation, I do want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which is comprised of the Siksika, the Kainai, the Piikani, and the Tsuut'ina, as well as the Stoney Nakoda Nation, as well as the Métis Nation Region 3, and all the people who make their home in Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. I wanted to include this photo here because I think it's an amazing photo of Calgary from the space station, all zoomed in, and you can see all the lights. And I think it's important to just reflect on, especially in these times, in this political climate, there's a lot of division and a lot of uncertainty. But I think this reminds us that we're all in this together, and we all share this land, and we're all neighbors at the end of the day. So moving on to the little welcome I wanted to provide. First of all, it's been an interesting 100 or so days since I've been elected, and I want to thank everyone so much for the support and the great conversations that we had on the doors. And I know it's very interesting being a city councillor, I'll say, because it's a very diverse board. So I've included a map here for those of you who aren't as familiar with what Ward 3 is. It has some really established communities in the south with Sandstone, McEwen, and Hidden Valley, and then some really emerging neighborhoods up in Livingston and Carrington, and a lot of development happening in the north part of our ward. So it's a very interesting time. It's been a fun time on council as well. We've had so many new council members getting to know each other, figuring out our strategic planning and where we're going to go as a city. And I'm trying to figure out how I can best communicate with all of you. And One of the challenges with the pandemic has been there's not always the best way. We can't have the same town halls and those things that we've had in the past. And this is the best way we could come up with to interact with you. Now, that being said, it's very one way. We had people send in questions in advance because it was a great way for us to ensure that we had answers for you and that we were picking questions that were the most common that came in. Really open to how we can modernize this and change it going forward, get it to be more of a two-way conversation. I would certainly love that. But I really appreciate everyone who submitted questions and came out today. I always say this, you represent the most engaged people in our community, so thank you. All right. Before we go too far, I do want to introduce my team because if you are interacting with our ward office, a lot of times you'll run into these folks. So this is Brianna Stallcup. She's our constituent liaison, and Brianna's main job is to help our constituents get where they need to go. So if you run into something in your own neighborhood and you send in a complaint, whether that's through the form on the city website or you email us, a lot of times Brianna will help triage where we need to go. There's many different city departments. People so far have written in around snow clearing, or around pathways, or around TELUS doing work in the area. And so Brianna's job is to help us resolve those issues and escalate things to me as well. I've spoken to many of you that Brianna has set up those meetings, so she has been great. As I mentioned off the top, there's a lot of development happening in Ward 3, and so the land use planning aspect of what we're building in the rest of our ward is really important. So much of being a city councillor is that land use piece. And so Pete Meadows is a planner by trade, and he is helping me on that stuff. And then the third member of my team is Zev Klimachko. Zev actually was in Evan Woolley's office prior to working in my office, which has been great because he's helped stand our office up in relatively short order. In order to get things done for folks and get people where they need to go, you have to have that administrative intel and being able to figure out who's the right person to talk to get the answer that we need. And so Zev has been absolutely fantastic, and he's my communications advisor. So he's the person behind the newsletter, which, by the way, if you're not signed up, we have got that going now. So you can go to the City of Calgary Ward 3 website. If you just Google my name, it'll come up and you can sign up for our newsletter. It will automatically send to you the one that we've sent out, and then you'll be on the mailing list for all subsequent newsletters. If you are from a community association or any other group, we're always looking for ideas of what kind of content, what kind of things can we share with people beyond just what's happening at City Hall. So feel free to reach out to Zev if there's anything that you'd like to include in that newsletter. So I'm going to start with some general updates before we dive deep into the Q&A. And these are things that are really important for constituents to know. I've been posting them, some of them on my socials, but I think that they would be valuable to reiterate here. The first is that when I was on the doors, I heard a lot about concerns around petty crime and it rising across the ward. And it's not always, you know, the small things like garden gnomes that are being taken. It can be more significant things, thefts from vehicles, catalytic converters as well. There tends to be a little bit of a neighborhood component to this. It's really common, more common in Livingston and Carrington because there's not as many people up there and it's easy access to sort of get in and out of those communities. And what I heard from CPS in my meeting with them was that part of the challenge with getting better enforcement in the area is that our crime statistics are actually still pretty low amongst other wards. And so it's hard to make the case that we should be putting more enforcement into the area when we don't have the same crime statistics that other places have. And so what I'm asking you to do is, you know, if something gets stolen in your neighborhood, even if it's not something that police are necessarily going to investigate, maybe it is sort of a lawn chair or something, or people break into your car and they take something, but not maybe something that you deem to be worthy of reporting. I do want to encourage you to, in fact, report it, because all of those statistics do help us to basically advocate for better enforcement over time. You can also report online, so thefts from vehicles, car prowling, those types of things like theft of property, you can report online. Anything that's more serious, like your car actually gets stolen or there's any type of violence or active crime happening, please do, of course, report those either in person or if the crime is in progress, via 911, but you can also reach out in the non-emergency line to report those. The other thing I wanted to put on your radar, and I know some of the folks who are watching probably did tune into the public engagement hosted by the Transportation Department on the Panorama Hills traffic calming pilot. But that project team is essentially looking at locations for permanent and temporary traffic calming based on community feedback. So they've identified a few different sites within Panorama, and many of you maybe had seen that engagement happening on January 25th, and the design and installation of those will happen later this year. So please do go onto the Engage website that is listed here and provide your feedback, because they will take that feedback and ultimately implement it. When I did share this on my social media, I had a lot of folks reach out and say, hey, this is happening in Panorama, but it's not happening in my neighborhood, and I would like it to. And I would certainly, I'm taking that feedback. I will advocate to see if we can get more traffic calming in other neighborhoods. When I was door knocking, I was just astounded by, in particularly in Coventry, how bad the speeding is. And so I'm working on figuring out what we can do to do better traffic calming and better pedestrian safety in Ward 3. That is a very big priority of mine, and appreciate any feedback that you have on that. Another thing I want to let you know about is rising electricity costs. We've had a few people writing in about their NMAX bill being very high right now. I met with NMAX just last week, and I'm sure you maybe have read in the news a little bit about what's going on. But there's a variety of factors that are all sort of coalescing at one time to drive up the prices of energy. And so consumption's particularly high, especially over the winter break when lots of people were at home, but it was also -30 out. I'm sure you remember it was quite awful. Also, the federal carbon tax is slowly increasing, which is putting pressure on prices. Demand is high, and so energy prices reflect that. And COVID-19, people are working more and more from home. And given that those prices are high, there is a variable component of transmission and distribution charges as well. And so that tends to put that pressure on. If you're on a variable rate, that's the floating rate that goes up and down over time, this is a particularly bad time to be on a variable rate because the variable prices are around 16 cents per kilowatt hour, and the fixed rate is still around 7 cents per kilowatt hour. So only about 30% of our residents are on a variable rate, but if you noticed a huge sticker shock on your bill, it could be because you're on a variable rate. So please do reach out to your energy provider and see about getting on a fixed rate. NMAX, from what I understand, is actually not able to tell people how to sort of save money because they do have a monopoly. So there's some energy regulatory rules that they have to follow. The other piece is, as much as there are terms on this, from what I understand, you can actually opt out after a month or switch your rate or switch your plan after a month. I'll put the utilities consumer advocate just on your radar as well. If you're not understanding your bill, or if you want to understand a little bit more about what's going on with it, you can go onto the utilities consumer advocate or call them, and they'll help you understand that. The next thing I want to put on your radar before we dive into all of the questions that you sent in is in September, Council approved a $100,000 Council Innovation Fund for Vivo and the Parks Foundation Calgary to create basically a strategy model for grassroots park development. And so they're going to be doing engagement with stakeholders in the area to create an initial project list, but also a longer term strategy that can hopefully be a model for other wards to figure out how you can get great parks projects done. We've had some amazing parks champions in the area, and that's why we have some really great parks that have popped up over the years. But in the spring, there will be meetings taking place on this, and there will be a website that's set up so that you can provide that engagement. You'll see on this particular map that there's some of Ward 2 and also Ward 4 here, and that's because that's Vivo's catchment area and they're a part of the project. So it's not just for Ward 3, it will include some other areas that Vivo serves. I also want to remind folks, especially those with kids, about the Vivo Play project. And so for those of you who don't know, VIVO will come into community spaces throughout the ward, and it's staffed with play ambassadors who bring different play activities right into communities. And I did hear a lot on the doors about how we want to have more amenity, more vibrancy within communities, and VIVO is really doing some great work. So if you weren't aware of this, the schedule, I believe, is Tuesdays they're in Panamount, Thursdays in Kenora, and then they're in Hidden Valley and Coventry on Saturdays. So you can find the schedule at the link that's provided right there. And finally, last thing for updates is that we are hosting in concert with Equal Voice, a What's It Like to Be a City Councillor sort of day, which is for young women in grades 9 to 12. The last day to sign up for this, if you know anyone in your life, maybe some of your kids or otherwise who would be interested in this, they can sign up until tomorrow. There is an opportunity for them to participate in a mock council, which is pretty cool. They can sit right in my seat in City Hall, and there's also an opportunity for them to just tune into a panel where myself and the mayor, as well as Councillor Sharp and Councillor Winus and Councillor Penner will be there to answer questions. So just thought I'd put that one on your radar as well. Okay, now the fun part. We dive into all the questions that you sent in. I want to start out by thanking everyone for sending in the questions. I think we really received around just over 20 different questions of different varieties and types. There were some that were hyper specific to one or two individuals, and so we are going to personally respond to all of those. So if you don't get an answer tonight, you'll get an answer from us into your specific issue, but we tried to pick the ones that kind of came up over and over again that most people would want to be were interested in. Okay. So the first one is, how did you vote on the vaccine passport and face covering bylaw, and kind of what is all going on with that? And I do want to start by saying that, you know, COVID-19 policy has been one of the most challenging and divisive policy spaces since being elected. I will say that in the last 2 weeks, I received easily 500 emails, and from both sides of people wanting the city to keep more rules on COVID-19 and vaccine passport and face coverings, and then also on the other side of saying, no, we really want you to align with the province. We want you to get rid of COVID-19 restrictions in their entirety, and it's a really challenging space to be. So in terms of the vaccine passport bylaw, the vaccine passport system was something that was brought in by the province in the fall of last year, and it was built entirely and completely on provincial infrastructure. Sure, you all have the QR codes or have seen them. And there was the province indicated that they would be getting rid of that system for a couple of reasons. One, because the vaccine passport system had primarily served its purpose of increasing vaccination, and the return on investment wasn't particularly there. And so they were rolling it back. And there was a push on City Council from some, and certainly some public pressure for us to try and keep that vaccine passport bylaw. And I voted against that because I think that tool has largely done its job. It's something that the city was never equipped or prepared in any way to take on its own, and we had to sort of let that go. And I think that was the right decision. I appreciate that there are folks who would prefer that it would stay, but I can tell you that when you do go into a public space now, the vast majority of people are vaccinated. So that is good news. The other piece is the face covering bylaw. And the face covering bylaw is something that the city had brought in advance of the province in the summer of, I guess, originally it was the summer of 2020. And there were conversations that we had about when should we take this face covering bylaw out? Should we immediately take it out? Should we just immediately align with the province? And there was a lot of public pressure to keep it because of this. The ICU rates and the hospitalization rates are still very, very high, and that the masks allow to basically help with the reduction of transmission of COVID-19. And so I spoke up at council and said, you know, I think we should wait and see what happens at the end of February to see if these rates are still going down, and then we could align with the province, and it was decided that we would be doing that without waiting. And so ultimately, we will be aligning with the province on both of these fronts. There is not going to be a face covering bylaw that extends past the provincial mandate. So I will say that I hope that those rates continue to trend downward and everyone has their own ability to wear masks. And I certainly encourage you to do that if certainly if you're sick or going out, spending time with seniors or those who are immunocompromised. I know this is a tricky one. There's a lot of emotions around COVID-19 policy, but that's where we're at the city anyways. Are we sending tax money to fight a legal challenge in Quebec? The short answer is no, but I'll also give you the longer background context. So for those of you who maybe don't know what Bill 21 is, it was a piece of legislation that was brought in Quebec where teachers, judges, lawyers, police officers, and any other government officials were banned from wearing religious symbols. And so hijabs, turbans, that kind of thing. It's a discriminatory law and it is before Quebec's Court of Appeal and will likely make its way all the way up to the Supreme Court. And it got a lot of traction and attention in the latter part of last year when a teacher was fired as a result of wearing a hijab. So you may have read headlines about municipalities across Canada, including Brampton, Kingston, I think maybe London and a couple others who are putting public money towards the joint legal challenge that's underway. And the mayor of Brampton kind of issued a challenge out to other municipalities, including our mayor, to bring forward a similar notice of motion to send $100,000 of tax money to fight that. Myself, Councillor Spencer, Councillor Dhaliwal, and other people in council had some real hesitations about the use of municipal tax dollars for such a cause. And that's not because it's not incredibly worthy, but because of the precedent that it could potentially set. Our municipal tax dollars are very precious and very few and far between. And because it also presented us an opportunity to better engage Calgarians in a way that allowed them to feel part of this. If they want to donate their own money towards the cause, we could set that up. And it also could serve as a catalyst for conversations that we need to have right here in our own city around anti-racism work and around community capacity building. So in the end, I think that it's going to land in a really good place. Myself, Councillor Spencer, and Councillor Dhaliwal right now are looking into how we can facilitate the donation of private funds. So we've met with the organizations that are doing this legal challenge, and we've had the conversations about basically setting up some kind of fundraising page that then we can go out to the public and they can privately donate. And then also working on basically building that community capacity around anti-racism work. So we will be reporting back to council on that progress by the end of March. The next question I got, this is another, we've had lots of hot topics happen at City Hall in the very short time that I've been there. Did you give yourself a pay raise? The answer is no. All council compensation is decided by a citizen-led committee, and our pay is indexed against something called the Alberta Average Weekly Earnings Calculation. And that is something that's basically on the basis of how Alberta wages are doing. It will adjust councillor pay, and that's sort of what happened at the beginning of January. There was a small percentage that our pay was going to change. Not something I voted to implement or really had any hand in implementing, and it would have happened no matter who was in this seat. What certain councillors do is bring forward motions to stop those types of changes from happening. So they kind of interfere with what the citizen-led committee has ultimately decided. In the past, council has kind of played ball on this and sort of made a political football, in my opinion, about their pay. But really, it's my opinion, and it was the opinion of largely of council, that we should not be doing this. We should make sure that we look at compensation in its entirety. For context, Edmonton City Councillors, I think, make the same salary as Calgary councillors. And I do understand that there's a very significant anti-government sentiment out there. But we'd spend too much time, I think, at City Hall talking about this particular issue. We do have a $4 billion operating budget. There's lots of places to find cost savings. And I don't understand why, as a city, we tend to get sucked into this conversation when we never hear about that for our provincial MLAs and our federal MPs. There's just other things I think that are better to focus on, but I did want to make it clear that no, I didn't. Okay, Next question is, what's the deals with security systems for councillors? I got this one a few times. And did I take a security system on the public purse? So I think the really important context that maybe got missed in the media is that councillors have actually always had security systems paid for as part of their job. And this was a policy change that happened where this got omitted, and corporate security came forward and met with council because of the rise in what was happening at people's houses. So you may have heard that at the mayor's house, there was a protest at John Carlo Corra, Jason Copping, who's an MLA. This was happening more and more because we were very much in a divisive time right now in politics. But even before COVID-19 policy, there was really good reason for councillors to have some sort of security, because land use items actually can be very controversial. And we have had instances of city councillors' own property being attacked because they're voting wrong on a land use item that people don't want to see. So I think my view is that no one should have to incur extra security costs just from doing their job. But the truth is that most councillors either already have their own security system or won't access this, because it will come only as a recommendation of corporate security if you really need to have that. So it was much ado, honestly, about I think what will actually amount to be very little money. I'm sure in a couple of years from now, some journalist will pull up how much money was actually spent on security systems, and it's not going to be the amount that I think everyone thought it was going to be. I think it'll be very, very much less. And I think, I do stand by this, because I think if we want people to feel comfortable getting into elected office, we have to ensure that they have those pieces. And again, provincial and federal elected officials do have security costs covered as part of that. So again, I don't think that it's out of scope or out of line with what you see at other levels of government. The next question is, why did you support a climate declaration? There was a lot of frustration, I think, about this and some misunderstanding about what the climate declaration means. But you'll know that when the federal government signed on to the Paris Accord to get Canada to net zero by 2050, that really was something that put a lot of pressure on all of our private industries and all other levels of government. They're pushing to make that transition a lot faster. So we're hearing new targets around 2030, 2035. And many cities and provinces have made their own net zero commitments, including Toronto, Vancouver, Hamilton, Montreal, Halifax, Edmonton. And what's interesting, and many of you may know this, most of our oil and gas producers have made their own net zero commitments as well. So I heard a lot of frustration from people in emails thinking that potentially the city's climate declaration was impacting the work of oil and gas industry. But Canadian Natural Resources, Cenovus Energy, Imperial, MEG, Suncor, they have all committed to reaching net zero from their oil sands operations in 2050, and that's like 90% of the oil sands. The other thing that's happening too is the federal government has announced a commitment to require 100% of cars sold within Canada to be net zero by 2035, which is going to put pressure on electrification in our wholly owned subsidiary of ENMAX. And I just provide these facts to place into context that the city as a corporation is not dragging anyone kicking and screaming into the energy transition. In fact, like I said, our primary industry of oil and gas is it's on its way to achieving those targets. And I think the city has to be a partner in that transition. So I'm going to show you what the, I'll put the wording, what I feel is the substantive wording of the notice of motion that you can see is really about positioning the corporation to be aligning its strategic business plans and departments to essentially be ready for the transition that is coming our way. As much as the energy transition is to some people a change they don't want to see, it's also an economic opportunity and an imperative. And that's certainly the way that the private sector has been approaching it. And I think we should have a similar perspective in the public sector. So you can't really expect private industry, I believe, to move on a challenge regulated by government if governments themselves won't move. So Calgary also has lots to gain and learn from other major energy producing centers like Austin, Texas, and in Houston. They're well on their way to net zero in a much more aggressive timeline. So I do appreciate that people didn't always like the word emergency, but this declaration is absolutely a signal that we are taking on the challenge of that energy transition very seriously. And I will say, from a larger governance perspective, when you think about getting to net zero, we have to get to net zero over time. And if we wait to start that work, it's going to be a really hard righting of the ship that is going to be felt a greater pinch by all of us. But if we concertedly and slowly work away at this, I think we'll be in a much better position in the longer term. So that is that one. The next one, I know lots has happened in a very few short months. What happened with the event center? So many of you have probably read about this. Using tax dollars to pay for the event center that is primarily utilized by CSEC was a highly contentious issue in Calgary. I heard about it quite a bit on the doors. So some people are really in favor and want the event center, and other people are not. But it was a commitment made by the previous council. They've been in negotiations with CSEC for a couple of years, and the deal really evolved over time. Both CSEC and the city agreed to sort of absorb different costs, and those kind of came to get better known, I think, as the project progressed, which is some of the explanation I was able to give earlier if you had been following along on my social media. But to put in context, the city moved from an original $275 million commitment to about $313 million of the $608 million total cost. And in the end, both sides have to agree to move past the next stage gate, which was December 31st. And CSEC advised that they would not be moving forward. There was a lot of conversation about, was this because the city added climate mitigation costs at the end? Was there something that was underhanded about the way that the city handled this? And I do encourage you to go back and watch council from the beginning of January. I put all those questions very firmly to administration, and they just didn't quite bear out. I really believe that there were just larger supply chain and costs that came about that made this not tenable for CSEC primarily. But council has reaffirmed its commitment to building an event center in downtown, and the partner may be CSEC or another group. A third party will be used, and I think that what we'll have now this time going into this that we didn't have before was a better understanding of the economic conditions compared to the 2019, right? You think we've had a global pandemic, you see what's going on with inflation and many other things. I think that this will allow the project to hopefully be done with a better understanding of costs. There were some folks who really felt that council didn't do enough to quote unquote save the deal. But there is a limit to, just as there's a limit, I guess, for CSEC to contribute money because they have to watch out for their sort of profit line there. There is also a limit in terms of what we can offer up from the public purse. And I will say that there was some desire for people who said to me, you should have just given more, whatever money it took to get that across the line. That wasn't even a decision that was before council at that point. And more broadly, like, the public purse can't be open indefinitely for projects. I don't think that's right by the taxpayer. As I have more updates about the arena, I'll provide them. But the city does have a lot of other capital projects on the go right now that are very exciting and don't seem to catch as many headlines as the event center. But the BMO Convention Center expansion is slated to be done in 2024 on time and on budget, as well as Arts Commons expansion and a few other things that we'll get into. Do you have an update on the new high school in Coventry? So I will show you the land for those of you who are maybe not aware of where this site is happening, if you haven't seen the construction, but it's located along Harvest Hills Boulevard near the Penatella Gate there. According to CBE, the new North Calgary High School will have about 1,800 students between grades 10 to 12. There's been considerable advocacy work that's been done over the years, probably by many of the people who are watching right now, to get this North Central High School. Right now, kids are bused to Diefenbaker, Crescent Heights. It's quite a ways, so it'll be fantastic to see this opening. Now, I've also had quite a number of questions about sort of what's going to happen to the infrastructure around it. So I don't know if I mentioned it's supposed to open, I believe, for the 2024-2025 school year. And Alberta Infrastructure and CBE are working right now to improve the roads and the traffic conditions that are going to be in this area. So a couple of the things that they're doing are putting new traffic signals at the school entrance of Harvest Hills Boulevard and Panatella Gate, which is sort of right at the bottom left of what you can see on your screen. And then there's a new school bus loading bay, a third lane on Harvest Hills Boulevard that will accommodate bus loading and unloading without disrupting the two northbound lanes. So if you are someone who drives in this area, you'll know just how busy it is. And so I completely understand why people are a little concerned about what that's going to mean in terms of traffic and flow in the area once that school opens up. And the other thing that will be happening is there will be on the southbound on Harvest, there's going to be a left hand turning lane into the school. So we will watch this very closely and work with the city to figure out how we can best support as this opens up. And it is very exciting, but with change certainly comes, questions, which thanks for submitting this one. Okay, what steps are you taking to increase and improve parking violation enforcement? So enforcement in the city, by and large, is complaint-based. That doesn't mean that there isn't patrolling that happens, but if there is something going on in your neighborhood where people are parking illegally and you would like to call that in, you can call Calgary Parking Authority. You can also reach out to our office. We'd be more than happy to pass along the message. One thing that is interesting is that they don't get out of their car anymore to give the tickets. It's all virtual. So sometimes or digital, I guess is the way to say it, they take the pictures. So sometimes you won't always know if they've come by. But if you're having issues with this, certainly do let us know. It's a little bit more common to get these kinds of questions in the inner city than it is in Ward 3. But by all means, please do reach out. What is being done regarding the bike and pedestrian crossing over Stony Trail North? This is a great question. And so the city will be connecting the new pathways on Stony Trail and Harvest Hills Boulevard interchange to the existing Greenway pathway system and adding a new crossing at the North Interchange intersection. This is scheduled to be complete in fall of this year. So that's in the works. If there's aspects of this project, because I know there's a lot of people who are really passionate about bikes and pathways that you're not seeing reflected or not seeing addressed, please do reach out to my office. We want to improve the walkability and connectivity within our ward, but that's the update that we have from the city at this particular point. What is the city doing to improve housing affordability? This is a really good question. And I know if you are someone who is in the market for a house right now, it is a bad time to, relatively speaking, to be purchasing a house. There have been real upward pressure on housing in the last little while. For a long time, Calgary has enjoyed really affordable housing relative to other major cities. I'm sure you hear about what goes on in Vancouver and Toronto, but even smaller centers. My parents live in Waterloo, Ontario, and the average home price there is now over $1 million, which is just wild. And so the city in Calgary, we've grown outward, which has allowed us to keep housing prices low. We don't have the same constraints in terms of space, but that isn't always sustainable indefinitely, because as we grow further and further out, that also means we have to send the garbage trucks that little bit further, and the transit has to go further. The Green Line's going to have to come further to the north, which don't worry, we're going to talk about that one. So the property taxes end up getting higher, which is also a sensitivity in terms of affordability. So the city is continuing to develop. They have a lot of land that is available that will provide more new housing, which is certainly a contentious issue in our city, but they also allow secondary suites. This is one way that people can gently densify their neighborhood. So if you have a basement that you're not particularly using, you can make a secondary suite, and then you can have that as rental income. In a lot of major cities like Vancouver, every single house more or less has a secondary suite, which is not how it is in Calgary right now, but more and more suites are becoming common. The other thing is there's a lot of federal money on the table right now for affordable housing. And unfortunately, Ward 3 has the least amount of affordable housing out of any ward. So we do have some exciting news coming on that in the future. Know that that's a space that the city's actively working on, because as the pressure on housing continues, it means that people will eventually even get priced out of the rental market, which is what we see in other markets, and hopefully does not happen here in Calgary, because we will be taking more of a concerted effort on this. What is your stance on secondary suites? So a question that I got. So suites are basically a way to gently densify areas, and they are an important aspect of helping Calgary reach its targets for its municipal development plan, which is basically the plan about how we're going to build our city going forward. And there's different zoning that we have in parts of Ward 3 where backyard or secondary suites are what we call discretionary, so R1 or our C1 districts. When a secondary suite goes in, what happens is CAs and neighbors will be able to comment on the development permit. Decisions can ultimately be appealed, but by and large, like most secondary suite applications that go through get approved. It's very rare that a secondary suite wouldn't get approved. I understand from some of the emails that we've gotten that people are frustrated, usually about two things. One is parking, that there's not enough parking. If everyone in the house, if you have 4 adults living in a house and they all have a car, it can put pressure on parking. And the other piece is garbage. So when you have a secondary suite, there's a lot more bins. And I can tell you that Waste and Recycling right now is working on how can we do something better with bins so that we don't have alleys completely full of the bins. So that is something that we're working on. And if there's something going on in your particular neighborhood, we do get all the secondary suite applications or the development permits that come through. You can reach out to us, but I live in a secondary suite. I'm not against them. And also, even if a politician tells you they're against secondary suites, by and large, like they get approved regardless. So it's something that we can certainly help to shape. And I take your feedback, but it's difficult to just stop a secondary suite unless there's a real reason why it can't happen. And you can kind of take two different perspectives on that. I mean, neighbors don't always like to see that their community is changing over time, but you know, individual property owners will say, well, I have a right to do what I want to do with my property. And so there's always that tension that happens there. I mean, if you go back numbers of decades, everyone lived in bungalows and people didn't like 2-story homes because they would block the view. So neighborhoods do continually change over time, and our neighborhoods in Ward 3, we don't get nearly the development applications that we see in the inner city, but they do happen. So please reach out to our office if you have any concerns. What's going on with the Indigenous gathering place? This is a really good question and very timely because Council has just recently moved on this. For those of you who don't know, Alberta has the 3rd largest Indigenous population. I started off this meeting tonight with the land acknowledgement because we are on Treaty 7 land. Right now in our city, there are 500 places devoted to cultural and spirituality, but not one of them is specifically dedicated to Indigenous people in terms, and there's nowhere for them to have ceremony and gather with Indigenous elders to pass on that traditional knowledge from one generation to another. So getting an Indigenous gathering place is a really important aspect of reconciliation work, and it does address the Truth and Reconciliation call to action number 21 to have an Indigenous gathering and healing space. So in November, Council committed to supporting a land acquisition for the site, as well as a memorial to recognize the children who did not return home from residential schools. So for those of you who maybe haven't been down to City Hall in a number of months, there is a huge memorial that has been put there of a whole bunch of shoes to represent all of the children that didn't come home. And putting something more permanent is a really important thing to do. And so Council has committed to doing that. And just on Tuesday, unanimously approved moving forward with the transfer of city-owned land to the Indigenous Gathering Place Society, which is a non-for-profit and non-nation-specific organization. And the exact location of where the Indigenous Gathering Place is going to be isn't yet determined, but it is going to be somewhere in the vicinity of where the Bow and Elbow Rivers meet. I was very happy to support this work and look forward to continuing to build nation-to-nation and leader-to-leader relationships with all of our Treaty 7 partners. Okay, next question is, what do you have an update on the Green Line? Yes. If you've been watching the headlines lately, you probably will have heard some news about Green Line. For those of you who don't have the context on Green Line, it is going to be the biggest infrastructure project in Calgary's history. And the goal of the Green Line is to essentially create a north-south leg of our LRT system. This project is so long overdue. The best time to build a Green Line would have been probably 20 or 30 years ago, but the next time is right now. I am going to show you this map just so people understand sort of the leg that we're talking about and where the Green Line is going right now. So the first phase of the Green Line is this from Eau Claire to Shepherd going south. And that construction process is, well, the planning for that is happening right now. And then you can't actually see it on this map, but the part at the top is what gets us over the river and comes north, is phase 2 of stage 1, and it's contingent on the first part of south going well. So the Green Line is working right now. They're doing utilities, relocating utilities within the Beltline. That's a lot of what is happening. They're working with businesses along this route to make sure they're supported and prepared for construction. I'll be very clear, like, I think there will be a lot of news around Green Line over the coming months or years, because it will be a disruptive project. It's hard to build a light rail transit project in the middle of a city once it's already established. So it will be disruptive, but it is a really important one. You may have heard as well that there's rising costs associated with the Green Line, and that is true. Just the same way that there were rising costs on the event center, that is existing here. I will assure you though that it is a cost-capped project, meaning that the overruns will be we can't move on to the next phase until we sort of figure this phase out, which is why there was a lot of conversations earlier on about, are we building a train to nowhere? I will contend that I don't think that's what we're doing. This train will be very valuable. It's going to the south in its first iteration, but it is coming north, and getting across the river is absolutely essential. Those decisions were locked in long before I was elected. This was the debate that happened, what direction to go, long before I was elected as a city councillor, and I know the last councillor pushed really hard to try and get that coming north. I know it's a huge frustration for people who live up here that the Green Line is going to take a very long time to get here, but know that I'm very supportive of the Green Line, working to secure additional funding for the other parts of the leg as we go forward. So that's the update on that, but that's not all I have to say about transit in Ward 3. So you may have heard that the city is going to be doing a North Central bus rapid transit program, and I have some updates on that. So the city conducted a functional planning study from 2020 to 2021, and there's sort of short, medium, and long-term recommendations for improvements. And so the proposed North Central BRT is basically going to try to link that Green Line all the way up north and sort of lay the tracks, so to speak, of what will ultimately be the Green Line over time. So if you look, you can see what's going to come. The short term is 0 to 5 years. So this is what the BRT will look like. I don't know how clearly these are showing up on your screen, so I will try to describe it. But the proposed short and medium term improvements will provide travel time savings of about 4 minutes between Center Street Bridge and North Point Park and Ride. And it will also it's supposed to, you know, make the riding experience ultimately better. I mean, we had a lot of conversations during the campaign with people about, you know, if we do shut down a lane of traffic, we want to ensure that it actually is, or sorry, not shut down, but like assign a lane of traffic to a BRT, that it is in fact faster for people to ride, and it is showing that. Now, I think those are kind of the biggest updates to sort of give on that. There have been improvements happening on the North Point Park and Ride lot, which will serve as a terminal station for the North Central BRT. And it's about 75% of the way there. There's still some work that needs to ultimately get done. And in the sort of longer term, we'll have more heated shelters and passenger infrastructure. The other thing that we're really working to ensure is that there's good active modes right along the BRT line, and so that people can ride their bike or pedestrians can walk. That's also a consideration. So yeah, that's the update right now on Green Line and on that BRT project. Can we get more off-leash dog parks? This is a really good question. So I'm going to show you a map of sort of what's been going on. I will say that I heard a lot in the doors about a desire for more dog parks and more space and amenity just in the area for people. I think also a lot of folks, including myself, got dogs during the pandemic, and so having places for dogs to go that are off leashes is really important. And I've heard over and over again how important it is to be able to walk to those amenities within your own neighborhood. But this is the update that I have right now. So in 2021, City Parks did engagement on a potential new off-leash park in both Coventry and Hidden Valley. But due to feedback from the public engagement, Parks is not supporting moving forward with either of these off-leash area projects, and we'll be updating that on the engagement page shortly. Hidden Valley, there were some issues with water services, and that potentially the dog waste getting into the water system, and so that's why that particular one did not move forward. And I know this is really disappointing. I know that there's been a lot of community push to have more dog parks, and I do have one update though, which is that we will be moving ahead with a temporary 10-acre off-leash area in the Aurora Business Park, which many of you will be familiar with this, but it's just south of 96th Avenue, and it will be opening up in the spring. And it will remain in place until the site is developed. And one of the challenges with the Aurora Business Park is that that is land that the city is holding for an eventual commercial business park there. And so one thing that I've noticed is the city is often hesitant to put in temporary infrastructure, because eventually when areas get developed, they will have to take it out. And people don't want the temporary infrastructure to go away. And because we don't have that many park spaces, it'll be a battle for sure. But right now, the signs have been created, and they will go out in the area to let people know that it's an off-leash area once that winter thaw is over. So that's the update there on dog parks, and I do want to say before those were the vast majority of questions we had. We did have a couple specific ones on signal timing of lights. I thought that was an interesting one. We'll get back to you if you're tuned in tonight, but the short answer on that one is what we've heard from the city is that the timing of lights a lot has to do with these traffic flows. And so if you're someone who lives in a neighborhood and you're coming out of, say, McEwen, and you're doing a bunch of left turns, it can actually be really long, the number of lights that you have to wait at. But the way the city makes those decisions is often based on the larger traffic patterns. And so if you have any issues with traffic timing and lights, you can certainly write into us, and we're happy to look up specific ones. So that's the update there. I know that this was not the best way to engage in terms of back and forth dialogue. It's me talking for an hour, which is not something I want to do in the longer term. And so we're really open to ideas about how we can do this better in the future. If there's, a different platform we could do, or once maybe COVID restrictions and COVID things go away, we would certainly love to do this in person. I've also toyed around with what would be a good way to make myself more readily available to people to just have conversations, whether that's kind of being in a coffee shop on a Saturday or coming to a certain location. I go to as many community events as we have them right now, but we don't have a ton. I want to be available and open to hearing from you. So people who write into us, we'll certainly respond to you that way. But if there's other ways that we think we can build that community vibrancy and two-way communication, certainly do let me know. This was our first crack at the can at the town hall. And so we will do this more. I did also get some feedback that why did you have your town hall the same night as Michelle Rempel? And honestly, we just did not realize, I think either of us, that we were having them on the same night. And so I was driving by my signs on Sandstone and in Sandstone and saw, oh, there's hers as well. The other thing I want to put on your radar in sort of as a final piece is just a plug for our community associations. You may have seen that I sent out a flyer just explaining what community associations do. And the reason for that is I heard a lot on the doors about wanting to have more things like flowers in the neighborhood, or better arenas and skating infrastructure, that type of thing, more dog parks, which community associations are a big part of lobbying for. So if you're not a member of your community association, I really encourage you to please do go buy a membership. In Ward 3, we have a new community association in Livingston. So if you're living up in Livingston and you're not a member, please do join. They're a very small and mighty community association that is trying to start up and really open to ideas about how they can do events and provide value to people outside of what the Homeowners Association does there. So you can go to livca.org for that. And then there's the Northern Hills Community Association, who I'm sure some of their members are watching tonight, who've done tremendous work, and they do everything from soccer programming to the Gift of Joy and helping people in our own community with having a great Christmas. That was one of the more recent things I participated in. But they do tons of advocacy on all the things that matter to people, parks and dog parks, and the list really goes on with them. So please do check it out. They do sport programming as well, if I didn't mention that. Your membership also gets you discounts at local businesses. So you can go to nhca.ca to buy a membership there. And then the Hidden Valley Community Association is another one. That's hiddenhut.org. And they've been instrumental as well in getting new playgrounds and free little libraries set up in the neighborhood, all those things that make our, and food trucks as well, all those things that make our neighborhoods great. And the last but not least is Sandstone and McEwen Community Association. They oversee the hockey and pleasure rink in the area, and they do a wonderful job with the flowers at the beginning or at the entry to neighborhoods. So if you're interested in supporting them, please do buy a membership, and feel free to reach out to my office with any further questions. And thanks everyone so much for joining tonight. So I think we're about to wrap up here with about two minutes to spare. Hope everyone has a great evening, and we'll connect soon. I don't know how.